Hi, my name is Shannon Bernick, and I'm so excited that you're able to join us this week as part of our First Year Friday series. And this week, we're going to be talking about building meaningful relationships with faculty and staff. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm an accessibility specialist here at the Office of Accessibility Services on campus. And we're really excited to share this particular presentation with you this week because at the OAS, we conducted some of our own research so that what we share with you today is very specific to FSU faculty and staff. But of course, if you're joining us from another institution, I'm sure you'll find that there are a lot of commonalities between what our faculty and staff had to say and what you experience at your own institution. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing we want to do is talk about some of those differences in high school and college, because there is quite a transition between the two. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the amount of time spent together. Oftentimes in high school, you might find that as a student, you live in the same community or even a nearby community as your teachers and school staff do. However, here at a large state institution like Florida State, we have a very diverse faculty and staff, as well as a very diverse student population. So you'll find that many of your professors and many of your classmates come from all over the United States and also internationally. In addition to that, when you're in high school, you often spend a lot of time together, especially in elementary school in those K through 5 years. You spend your entire day with your teacher. And even in middle school and high school, you may also interact with your teachers outside of class time. So you really get the opportunity to know each other on a personal level. While in college, you may have a class that only meets once a week, or perhaps you're taking online and remote classes where you never meet face to face with the professor. So, the amount of time spent together can definitely create a challenge in building those meaningful relationships. Another factor that you want to consider is the number of students. Oftentimes, we have students who transition from a private high school where they had very small classes of maybe 50 people in their entire graduating class. And of course, we know here at Florida State, some of your introductory classes may be as large as 200 people in one lecture hall. So there's definitely not the opportunity for students to have as much one-on-one face time as they might have in smaller courses. And then another factor to keep in mind is job responsibilities. We know that in the K through 12 level, teachers' primary responsibility is just that, teaching. However, at the college level, professors have many job responsibilities. Oftentimes, they are leading researchers in their field, which means that they also do a tremendous amount of writing in terms of journal articles and books that they publish. Additionally, they serve as an advisor on many committees, and they may also still serve as a field expert in a consulting capacity. So their time is definitely spread among more job duties than a teacher at the K through 12 level. Additionally, student responsibilities are slightly different between high school and college. If you were with us a few weeks ago, we talked about how in high school, your teacher often reteaches what was in the textbook. However, at the college level, students are expected to have prepared that material already for class and then have to participate in expanding that knowledge during the lecture in the classroom. So there's different job responsibilities, not only for teachers and professors, but also for students between high school and college. We know, though, that it is still important to build meaningful relationships with faculty and staff for several different reasons. The first is that it definitely enhances the learning process. You will have access to field experts. As I said, they do lots of research, they do lots of publishing. So they are definitely experts in their field, and they can provide a wealth of in depth knowledge for you. Also, when it comes to staff, we are experts on campus resources. So we can make sure that if you have a concern, we are referring you to the resource that can best meet it. Additionally, faculty and staff can act as advisors or mentors, and this is especially important as you advance in your studies. Perhaps you are going to graduate school or pursuing a PhD, and faculty and staff can definitely help with advising and mentoring you through that process, or even sit as a member on your committee. Again, building those meaningful relationships builds a professional network. So not only might they serve on your committee, but they might also be able to provide a reference or nominate you for an award or scholarship. And finally, it builds your campus support system, which is very important because when we're away from home, especially for the first time in that freshman year, or if you're just joining us as a graduate student, oftentimes we don't have as many resources as we had in our community where we grew up. So it's very important to begin to build that support system here at FSU for yourself. So this part, in order to build those meaningful relationships, we wanted to go directly to the faculty and staff here at FSU to see what they had to say about it. And so our office conducted a survey of 306 FSU faculty members just recently. In fact, it was at the end of this spring, early summer. And we asked them to rate 15 relationship building practices as either not at all important, slightly important, moderately important, very important, and extremely important. And then we also asked them to note any other practices outside of those 15 that they thought might be helpful. And we got some really interesting results. So you can see here, ranked from greatest to least, the 15 practices, and asking for help when needed was rated as either very important or extremely important by 96% of FSU faculty. So very high on the scale there. Participating in class was next with 90%, followed by communicating regularly at 77%, completing assignments on time at 76%, which was tied with requesting accommodations early at 76%. This one is particularly important for students with disabilities. Then we had talking to the professor about your goals, attending office hours, asking for advice, calling the professor by their preferred title, saying thank you, introducing yourself at the start of the semester, earning a good grade, sitting in the front of the class, asking for a reference, and researching the professor's work. So this sounds like a lot because we've just listed 15 different items. But there was something that a professor had noted in the survey that I thought was important to note right here. And it said, I think most of these things can help build meaningful relationships, but not every student needs to do all of them in order to build a relationship with their professor. If they don't do at least one of them, the professor may not have the opportunity to know them in a large class. So I think this is really important to remember. As we discuss these practices today, you certainly don't have to do all of them to build a meaningful relationship with your professor. However, it is important that you are doing the ones that speak to you so that you can build that campus support system and be engaged in the learning process. So with that in mind, we are going to talk in more detail about 3 of these. I've chosen the top 2, asking for help when needed and participating in class. And then I've also chosen the requesting accommodations early, which was tied at 4th place, because that is very important for students with disabilities. So let's talk about asking for help when needed. I always like to think about this one in terms of sending an email, visiting office hours, or scheduling a meeting as soon as possible when you have a concern. And this always reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, and that is, there is the time in the life of every problem when it is big enough to see, but small enough to solve. And you want to think in terms of approaching your professors for help, in terms of the problem being big enough that you recognize there's a concern, but it hasn't gotten out of control yet. So maybe you see your professor when you've fallen a week behind as opposed to have fallen a month behind. We definitely are able to help you best when the problem is at its smallest. And of course, you always want to make sure that you're reviewing the course syllabus for important information because that can help in leading the conversation with your professor. Saying, hey, I noticed that your syllabus said this, but it was unclear, or I wasn't sure how that applied to my situation. When you have that conversation, you do want to be solution focused. So you might make a statement such as, I'm doing well on the practice problems assigned for homework, but when I took the exam, the problems seemed more difficult and I didn't do as well as I wanted to. How can I improve on the next exam? Just opening the door there, you're very direct with your concern. You're not doing as well on the exams as you would like, and you're being very specific about where you would like help. You'd like to improve on the next exam. And this might open the door for a conversation about how you've been preparing for exams and what you might be doing differently. So maybe as you've been doing your homework, you've been using a lot of resources, relying on your notes, your textbook. But of course, when it comes time for the exam, you don't have those. So your professor might suggest something like trying to do some of the practice problems without those resources. And then we can actually, when asking for help, practice one of those other relationship building practices, which is saying thank you or expressing gratitude. And that's just a simple statement like, thank you. I think the ideas you shared will be helpful, and I'm going to try them on the next homework assignment. So that lets your professor know that you appreciate the extra time that they've put into addressing your concern. One of our professors had this to say about students asking for help. I think teachers like to be useful to their students' learning process and like to see their growth. So do not be afraid to send a message, go to office hours, just to talk about your academic path, or even something little that you did not understand from class or something you want to hear more about. You are telling your teacher that they are a meaningful resource for you. And I really loved this perspective on asking for help because sometimes we can feel like maybe we're being a burden or putting someone out by asking them to help us. But this professor was saying, hey, when you come to me for help, you're telling me that I'm a meaningful resource for you. And you're kind of recognizing their expertise and telling them that their expertise and that their mentorship matters to you. So I really liked this perspective as opposed to seeing yourself as a burden or not wanting to put them out. You're telling them that they are a meaningful resource for you. The second practice that was rated very high at 90% is participating in class. And oftentimes, students may think that the only way to participate in class is to answer a professor's question. But there's actually a lot of different ways to participate. And it actually begins before class by preparing. And this means reading the articles or the textbook chapter. This means watching any videos or participating in any discussion boards that are meant to get you thinking. During this time, it's always good to take notes, including questions that you have about the material, so that during class, you can also participate in a number of ways. And of course, there is the traditional way of answering the professor's question, either during class or in the case of online courses, in a discussion board. And we want to be sure that we're being brief and to the point, especially during class time because it is limited. So you don't have to have an elaborate answer. It can be very brief, it can be very to the point. In addition to answering professors' questions, you could also ask a question of your own, again, during class or on a discussion board for an online format. And these questions can be as simple as asking the professor to clarify the class materials or to expand upon an idea that was particularly interesting to you. Another way to participate in class is to respond to a classmate's comment. You can ask for additional information about what they've said, or you could ask a question to clarify what they've said or to develop it even further. So maybe you are really interested in what they had to say and you were thinking about it too. You can go ahead and expand upon that. And then additionally, you can share your thoughts during class or on the discussion board. And again, this can refer back to your notes that you took while you were preparing for class, Or you could also simply share an experience. So this might be something that you saw in a museum or something from a book you read that relates to the class materials. So what you share doesn't have to be tied to exactly what was part of the class preparations, but rather something that relates to it. And then finally, you always have the option to participate by following up after class. You can do this in an email or on a discussion board. Perhaps you come across something that's related to the class materials, or perhaps something's just kind of been turning over in your mind and you have some thoughts on it. You can always reach out to your professor or go back to those discussion boards and add to them. One of our FSU faculty said this about participating in class. I think the key to building a meaningful relationship with a professor is just to be an engaged student and reach out to the professor whenever the student is stuck on a problem or concept. Students just need to be engaged, and the relationship will usually build organically from there. So, again, all of those things we just talked about as ways of participating in class, that's being engaged. And when we're engaged in a conversation, those relationships do organically build. Sometimes this can seem more challenging in an online format. So, one of our online professors said, I teach online courses where it can be more challenging to make personal connections. I appreciate it when students take the time to contact me, either via email or phone, to discuss their goals and to ask questions. I also think it is good for students to interact with me and with other students in synchronous activities like our Blackboard collaborate sessions and asynchronous activities, including discussion board forums. The more information I have about students, the better I can help support their learning goals and needs. So, even in that online environment, our professors really want you to be engaged with the material, with them, and with your classmates in having those conversations about the course content. And then finally, in terms of relationship building practices with faculty, we want to talk about requesting accommodations early because this one is specific to students with disabilities. Our office always recommends that you request your accommodations in the AIM portal at the start of the semester. The reason we suggest that you do this is because accommodations cannot be used retroactively. However, there's no harm done if you end up not using the accommodations. There's no penalty for that. So we always recommend just go ahead and request them in all of your classes up front so that if you need them, they're already in place. Of course, you don't have to do it this way. You're welcome to request them at any point in the semester, but keeping in mind that they cannot be used retroactively. And then, of course, we always highly recommend that you follow up your requests with a conversation with each of your professors. And this is best done by scheduling a one on one meeting or call while we're in a remote format. And it's important before this conversation begins to remember that self disclosure of your disability or diagnosis is not required to your professors. Self disclosure is only required to our office. And of course, we will not share that with anyone, including your professors. And you do not have to share it with anyone outside of our office either. You certainly can if you would like to have that conversation, but it's not a requirement. During your conversation with your professors, you'll want to focus on two things. And the first is focusing on how the accommodations will be implemented in their class. Each professor does things slightly differently, so it's always important to touch base with them to know what their process is. You might say something like, I'm a student who is registered with the OAS and has been approved for extended time on testing. How do you implement extended time on tests in your course? And this opens the door for your professor to talk about programs like Honor Lock or Zoom proctoring, or even testing at our OAS center. And they will walk you through exactly what it looks like in their course, which may be slightly different from class to class. Another part of that conversation should be negotiating the limitations of accommodations. So we know that some accommodations require more conversation than others. And so one of those examples is taking breaks during class. And you might talk to your professor while also maintaining the confidentiality of your specific diagnosis by saying something like, when my disability related symptoms flare up, I might need to use my approved accommodation of taking a break during class. What are some of the limitations of taking breaks in your class? This opens the door for a conversation about those limitations. So, one of the examples might be talking about safe times to take a break. And the most common time when this conversation needs to be had is if you are working in a lab setting. So, if you're doing a chemistry experiment, there may be times when it's not safe for you to walk away. However, you might be experiencing a flare up of your symptoms. So you'll want to talk to your professor about a way for you to discreetly notify them and a process to have in place of someone covering for you so that it is safe for you to walk away if you have a flare up of your symptoms. You also want to talk about how you will cover the missed material while you were out of the classroom for the break. And then you also want to talk about the number of reasonable breaks. And of course, this language goes back to the ADA, which allows for reasonable accommodation. So if we only have a 50-minute class and you are requesting to take 6 5-minute breaks, you would be missing the majority of the class, which of course would bring into question whether or not that was reasonable. So you want to make sure that you're having those conversations about the limitations of your accommodations with your professors as well. And then, of course, as we said earlier, you always want to reach out to your professors as soon as possible when you have a concern or a flare up of disability related symptoms that is going to impact your work or attendance. And this is especially important if you think that you're going to miss class or if you think that you're going to miss a deadline. And then, of course, if you're unable to contact your professor when you have a flare up of symptoms, perhaps it's something that requires emergency care, or perhaps you're unable to resolve a concern with your professor. You can always reach out to the to the OAS, and we will be happy to facilitate a conversation between you and your professor, so that hopefully we can work things out and find a solution for you. Moving on to our staff survey, at the same time, late spring, early summer of this year, we conducted a survey of 45 Division of Student Affairs staff members, and we asked them to write 11 relationship building practices as either not at all important, slightly important, moderately important, very important, and extremely important. And of course, we asked the staff to note any other practices that they thought would be helpful. So the 11 practices that we asked them to rate were asking for help when needed, which received a rating of 100% of staff who rated that as either very important or extremely important. Being polite in your correspondence was second, with 85% rating it as very or extremely important, followed by completing required forms in a timely manner at 82%, introducing yourself at the start of the semester, communicating regularly, requesting services early, talking to the staff about your goals, saying thank you, attending informational sessions provided by the department, calling the staff by their preferred title, and reviewing the department's website. And again, there are a lot of practices here that you can use to build a relationship. And you want to choose the ones that work best for you. You know your needs best, and you know which of these will be most helpful for you. And then, of course, as we mentioned earlier, there's some that just can be interwoven. You can say thank you after you've completed your forms, or you can say thank you after you've asked for help. So we can definitely interweave these so that you're kind of doing more than one at a time. For the purposes of today's presentation, we're going to talk about the top three and just some strategies for how to go about them here at FSU. So in terms of asking for help when needed, again, remember one of my favorite quotes There's a time in the life of every problem when it's big enough to see, but small enough to solve. So you want to reach out to campus support staff as soon as possible when you have a concern. The concerns that you would want to reach out to us for may involve not being resolved after meeting with a professor. So, again, as I mentioned, our office can help facilitate a conversation between you and your professors to hopefully reach an agreement. If you have a concern that impacts you across classes, for example, you're having difficulty managing your time, perhaps you experience an injury or a death in your family. Those things are going to impact you across all of your classes, and campus support staff can help you with those. A concern that impacts your ability to complete a course or the semester. So, this would be dropping a course or even withdrawing for the semester. And some things that might lead you to have to do that, or if you have a medical or mental health experience that is unexpected or that is overwhelming for you. And then, of course, if you have a concern that involves hazing or being a victim of a crime, we also have campus support staff that can help you with that. Anytime you're not sure who to reach out to, as a student with a disability, you can always start with the OAS. Many times we'll be able to help you with your concern right within our own office. But if we're not able to, we'll definitely stick with you every step of the way as we refer you to the campus support staff who can help you. One of our staff members in the DSA had this to say about reaching out for help. I think reaching out for help and utilizing our resources is most important. That way, we can operate on a level of familiarity with our students when they come back again for help or advice. So, we want to get to know you. The better we know you, the better you express your concern and your goals to us, the better we're able to help get you to the right resources on campus. The second highest rated relationship building practice with staff was being polite in your correspondence. And this is going to look like a little bit of a lengthy list, but then I'm going to share an example with you and you'll see how easily it comes together. So, of course, we always want to make sure that we're using professional greetings. When we're talking to faculty and staff, we want to avoid saying things like, "Hey, professor." Instead, we want to use a more professional greeting, such as hello or good morning, good afternoon. And we also want to make sure that we're using the person's preferred title or pronouns. Now, if you don't know what the person's preferred title or pronouns are, that's okay. You can just use a term that is generally considered professional and polite. And some examples of that are professor, doctor, ma'am, and sir. And then, of course, if they prefer to be something called by another title or another pronoun, they'll let you know. And you definitely only want to use the first name if you have been asked to. You want to make sure that you're using professional language. So you want to avoid acronyms like LOL. You want to avoid any slang or curse words as well. You definitely want to introduce yourself. If it's correspondence with a faculty member, you're going to want to give your course title and section number. Again, we talked about how professors sometimes have a class of 200 people and they may have 2 or 3 classes like that. So you definitely want to let them know which course and what section you're referring to. Again, you want to be direct and solution focused, as we talked about earlier. So state your concern and state where you need help. And then, of course, we can easily incorporate an expression of gratitude by saying thank you. And again, you want to include your contact information so that they know how to reach you. This sounds like a little bit of a lengthy list, but it actually comes together pretty succinctly. So let's take a look at an example email. Hello, ma'am. My name is FSU student. I am writing to you today because I experienced a death in my family and will have to miss several of my classes. I would like to meet with you to discuss a letter of support. I am available anytime Thursday and before noon on Friday. Please let me know if either of these times work for you. I can be reached by replying to this email or by phone at 123-456-7890. Thank you for your help. Sincerely, FSU student. Sample email at fsu.edu 123-456-7890. So you can see that we've included all of the components here. We have a professional greeting followed by a professional title. We introduced ourselves. We were very direct about why we were contacting them and what help we wanted. We let them know when we're available to meet, and we let them know how we could be reached. We also expressed gratitude. We used a professional closing, and we included our contact information. So, although it's quite a lengthy list that we talked about, it did come together quite succinctly in this email. And you can always refer back to this to use this as a template when you have a concern that you're reaching out to a faculty or staff member about. And then one of our staff members had this to say about being direct. So, being straightforward about what you need or don't understand. I think too often we try to make an excuse for why we need help rather than just owning it. My roommate didn't give me the message. My dog ate my homework. I left you several messages, but you didn't get back to me. My point is be direct. Ask for what you need. We want to help you be successful. And this is so true. We want you to be successful. That's what our entire job is based upon, is helping you to get the resources that you need to be successful. So you don't have to make excuses with us. We understand that sometimes people make mistakes, sometimes things go wrong. We completely understand that. We're here to support you either way and to help you have the best experience that you can. So just reach out to us. Tell us what you're concerned about. Tell us what you think can help make it right. And then finally, completing forms in a timely manner. And this one is so extremely important because there are deadlines. So as soon as someone gives you a form to fill it out as soon as possible and return it. Those deadlines sometimes, once they pass, that means there's not much we can do to help you. So definitely observe those deadlines when you're given a form to complete. And then, of course, just follow all instructions on the form. You want to make sure that you're answering all questions, that you're including supporting documentation if it's required with the form. And if you're unsure how to do any of that, just ask for assistance. Start with the person who gave you the form. And if they can't help you, ask them if they know someone else who can. And of course, coming back to our office is always a great way to find a resource when you're unsure who that resource is. And again, like I said, if you're unsure who to talk to about the concern, always start with the OAS. We have walk-in hours available several days a week, so oftentimes we can meet with you the same day to help you resolve your concern. You can always reach out to your primary advisor, but if you don't know who that primary advisor is, you can contact our main line at oas@fsu.edu. You can reach out by phone at 850-644-9566. And of course, in the fall, when we return in person, you can stop by our building at the 108 Student Services Building at 874 Traditions Way. And again, I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. I hope that this has been helpful for you. Of course, if you have any questions for me directly, you're welcome to reach out to me. My name is Shannon Bernick, and my email is sbernick@fsu.edu, which you can find, of course, on our website. You can also just email this main line and it will be forwarded to me as well. All right, thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you next week.